from leaving the priesthood, it was 1 year, and I declared Shahada and became Muslim. 1 year later, I came to live in Egypt. So quite an extraordinary change. In 2 years, I changed from being a priest, trained in the Vatican, working as a priest in London, to being a simple Muslim man, having moved to the Middle East. Alhamdulillah. I suppose I've always been a religious person. I've always been a spiritual person. I had a very ordinary childhood. I belonged to a fairly ordinary Roman Catholic family. We went to church on Sunday. But right from an early age, I was sort of a spiritual boy. I thought about religious things. When I finished school, I went to university and studied English language and literature at Manchester University. And I already decided before going to university that I wanted in some way to spend my life in the church. And when I finished university, I went and I joined a religious order. I became a religious brother. And for 20 years or so, I taught as a religious brother. And then towards the end of that time, again, Almighty Allah leads us in very strange ways. It seemed to me that I wanted to go further than being a brother. I wanted to be a priest. So I asked the bishop, and he sent me off to Rome to study sacred theology, philosophy in Rome, in the Vatican, training to be a priest. I was ordained a priest and returned back to London, and enjoyed very much being a priest. I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed the work I was doing, working with ordinary people. You know, it's a very privileged thing to be allowed into people's lives in the way that a priest is allowed into people's lives. It was my privilege to be with children as they were born, to be with people as they were being buried, to visit the sick in hospital, to work with young people. I enjoyed being a priest very much, and the work was very fulfilling. But you know, as I said, Allah Almighty works with us as the people we are. I wasn't happy. I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed the work of being a priest. And the people loved me very much and supported me. But somehow my heart just wasn't happy. And it was this that Almighty Allah used. He was using it all the time. It was this that would eventually bring me to Islam. But it was this that made me make the very difficult decision to leave the priesthood. People often say to me in life, what a great change from being a Roman Catholic priest to being Muslim. I don't see any change. I see it as a straight line from the day I was born to the moment I'm sitting here talking to you today. Because Almighty Allah led me using all the things in my life to bring me where I am. And I like to even think that when I was sitting in Rome, listening to lectures about theology, about Thomas Aquinas and church teaching, I like to think that I was being trained to talk to you today. So when I left the priesthood, I needed a holiday. I'd no money, so I looked for any holiday I could find on the internet. And the holiday I found, of all places in the world, Allah Almighty led me there, was to Egypt. And that was to begin the most extraordinary journey of my life. Living in the United Kingdom, I knew about Muslims just what everyone knew, that they were terrorists and they chop your hands and they're cruel to ladies and all of those kind of things. So I went to Egypt simply because, as I say, it was the holiday I found on the internet. But when I got there, I came across Muslims for the first time in my life, and they were just the opposite of what I'd been told. They were the opposite of what the television and the newspapers and the radio had told me. They weren't saber-rattling fanatics, terrorists, extremists. Not at all. They were the sweetest, the kindest, the gentlest people I'd ever met. And they walked they walked straight with a confidence in being Muslim. And in everything they did, they said, Alhamdulillah, thanks be to God. And they mentioned the name of God all the time, and they prayed in the street before me. And so this was a complete shock to my system. It wasn't what I'd been told at all. It's not what, if truth be told, it's not what the West thinks about the Middle East and about Muslims. I found them to be the kindest, the gentlest people on earth. And it was their kindness that brought me to Islam. I'd been a teacher all my life, and when I came back from Egypt, I needed a job. I had no job. So I got a job teaching in a school, teaching RE. I became head of religious education. And it was my job to teach the students in the school about the world's 6 major religions. Now, I knew a lot about Christianity because I trained about it. I trained all my life. I'd studied in Rome. But the other religions, including Islam, I knew very little. I'd seen Muslims in Egypt, but still I didn't want to be Muslim. I hadn't learned too much about Islam. So to prepare my lessons, I had to read. So the night before, like many a teacher, I got the books out to prepare my classes. Now, one of the things too is very important is in this school, many of the pupils were Muslim. They were Arabs. And it was their example in these months, their example more than anything, plus my reading about Islam to teach them, that was having a profound effect on my heart as well as on my mind. And I found myself, in fact, when I was teaching a class of 30, when I mentioned the name of Prophet Muhammad, I found tears coming in my eyes. And I mentioned the 5 pillars of Islam, and I found myself choking. And I'd have to cover my choking with a cough to look strong in front of the pupils. So in these months, I was very slowly being drawn closer and closer to Islam. After many months, the pupils came to me and said, "Sir, Ramadan is approaching and we've got nowhere to pray. And your classroom is the only room in the school with a carpet." You see again how Allah uses us? My room was the only room with a carpet. They said, "Can we pray in your classroom?" I said yes, and for the whole of Ramadan, I sat at the back of the class while they prayed. I said to them, "Well, because you've come to me to ask, can you pray? I'll do something for you. I will fast with you during Ramadan." So even though I wasn't Muslim, I fasted for the month of Ramadan. And during that whole month, I began slowly to watch what they were doing and to listen. So that, strangely, by the end of Ramadan, I knew how to pray as a Muslim prays. By the time Ramadan was over then, I was very comfortable being with Arabs, with Muslims. I liked Islam. I knew that Islam was not what the television told me. I knew that Islam was very gentle and very sweet, and I knew that Muslims were very kind, very good people. So I started wanting to know more about Islam, and I began to go to talks. at the biggest mosque in London, London Central Mosque. Each Saturday afternoon they had talks for new Muslims and for people interested in Islam. So I went along to learn more from my teaching, and also because I liked Islam, I liked Muslims. Now, the last talk I went to was given by Yusuf Islam, you know, the former pop singer Cat Stevens. And I listened, and at the end of his talk, I went to him and I said, Brother Yusuf, what do you actually do to become Muslim? I don't want to be Muslim. I just would like to know, what do you do? And he looked at me and he said, well, Muslims believe in one God. And I said, well, I believe in one God. He said, and Muslims pray 5 times a day. I said, well, actually, I know the prayers. I know how to pray. I know the prayers in Arabic. And he looked at me and said, and Muslims fast during Ramadan. And I said, well, actually, I fasted during Ramadan. And he looked me straight in the eyes. And he said to me, brother, you're Muslim already. Who are you trying to fool? And at that very moment, when he said, brother, you are Muslim already, the adhan sounded, the call to prayer for the sunset prayer, Salat al-Maghrib. Allahu Akbar. So I had ringing in my ears those words, brother, you are Muslim already. And I heard being recited out loud, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And I followed everyone upstairs to the prayer hall, and I sat down at the back. And the brothers were in front of me, the sisters were up in the balcony, and Salat al-Maghrib began, the prayer began, and as they began to pray, I began to cry. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And I realized that that journey that had begun when I was born, the journey that Almighty Allah had led me by the hand through my life, had brought me to that moment. And I went forward to Yusuf Islam, because I knew then that Allah had touched my heart and wanted me to be Muslim. And I went to Yusuf Islam and said, I want to declare Shahada. So he said to me, say these words after me, Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. And I said those words, and they changed my life. Really, I've been the happiest man on earth since. When I'd said the words, he said to me, now go home, take a bath, take a shower, because you are like a newborn baby that has come into the world with no sins at all. All the sins of your past life have been wiped away. And you're better now than all the Muslims in the world because you're without sin. Alhamdulillah. After declaring Shahada then, I lived in London for another year as a Muslim. And during that time, I eased myself into doing the things Muslims do. I learned how to pray 5 times a day. I learned fasting again in Ramadan. And I learned something that's very important. Islam, you know, is very, very simple. Muslims believe that Islam is the natural religion of mankind, that it's existed since the beginning of time, that Prophet Adam والسلام, was the first Muslim. And all prophets through history, Moses, David, Solomon, even Jesus, peace be upon them all, were all Muslim prophets, prophets of the one God. And so during this time in London, I was becoming used to the routines of Islam. But the more I lived there, the more I realized I wanted to move and move to a Muslim country. By this time, I'd visited Egypt many times. During that first year, I'd been back to Egypt many, many times. And I was looking all the time now for an opportunity to go there. So when the chance came, I moved as quickly as I could. I won't say I rejected the West. I didn't reject it. There are many good things that I love about the West, and my friends are there, and I have family there. But I had seen something in the Middle East, in the Muslim lands, that appealed to my heart much more. So as soon as the chance came, I moved. during that first year, I looked for any opportunity that I could find to go and live in the Middle East. Remember, I'd lived in Rome for several years, and I enjoyed the way of life, the sunshine, in fact. And so, combining that with Islam, I thought if I moved to a Muslim country in the Middle East, I'd be just so happy. And at the end of that first year, an opportunity came for me to go and live and work in Egypt as an English teacher. It wasn't ideally what I wanted, but to live in Egypt was. So after a year of being Muslim, I packed my bags and I quite literally said goodbye to London and to all that I'd been used to embark on a new life in Egypt. From the moment I arrived in Egypt, I felt at home. From the moment I arrived, I felt as though I'd always lived there. I sort of sighed and my shoulders went down in happiness, because it's difficult for people who don't know. Living in a Muslim country, living in an Arab country, I've been to many Arab countries. Living in Egypt, for example, as in other Arab countries I've been in, it's so safe. You could walk the whole night through the city and no one would harm you. Now, no one has this idea in the West at all. It is totally safe. Ladies can walk on their own, they wouldn't be harmed. People have good manners and they're polite. Young people, for example, stand up on the bus to let an old lady or someone older than them sit down. How extraordinary many people in the West would find when a lad of 17 would hold his dad's hand to cross the road. Yeah, I just felt so comfortable. It's very safe. The manners, the morals are good. In fact, I'd say that what the Muslim world, the Arab world has to offer to the West is something that the West lost many, many years ago. Those values of respect for the elderly, of respect for the young, of respect for women, all of these things you find, and I found in Egypt. So we've been talking about Western civilization and asking ourselves why people in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, why do they all want to go to the West? We'll write jobs, money, technology. What was the other one we said? Was that it?
Education.
Education. Very good. Education. People want to travel for these reasons. They want to travel, but it seems that they always want to travel that way.
Yeah.
They're not exactly queuing up to travel that way, are they?
No.
I have. I've travelled that way. I've travelled that way. Because I think what we've got here, I won't say superior, because every culture, every country has got good things. But the way I put it is, I feel more comfortable, I feel more relaxed here, in the East. Why do they need to travel to America for a good life?
In my opinion,
Yes.
good life means good income,
Okay.
living in a good country with high technology and civilized country.
They all want to go to the West. And the first thing you said, my dear brother, the first thing you said was income. You want to go for income. And the second thing you said was civilization, civilized place. And then you reminded us that faith was important, and you wanted those things too.
Yeah.
Okay. A comparison I always make is a bus driver in Damascus is no different to a bus driver in New York. Both men go out to work to feed their kids, to put food on the table, maybe to save up for a family holiday if they've got enough, to pay the bills, pay for the gas and the electricity. The man in Damascus isn't an international terrorist. He's just an ordinary man going out to work. The man in New York, he doesn't want to control the world. All he wants to do is feed his kids. People here from different backgrounds. And I asked you, brother, you're from the Philippines.
Yes.
And I asked you, because we're talking about the West and the East, where is the Philippines? Is that the West or the East?
The Philippines is located in the West, maybe.
Okay, you consider the Philippines in the West.
Yeah.
And what do you base that on?
Regarding the systems in the Philippines, yeah, they are always taking the system in the West.
Okay. What about Ghana? Would you put Ghana in the West or the East?
Okay, if the meaning of the West is the culture or their civilization, Ghana is West, because we have Western civilization. The colonists are British.
Okay.
So the national language is English.
Okay.
And the people there, their life, their daily life is like English people.
Okay.
So if the geographically we're Africans.
Okay.
But if the meaning of the West is the culture,
Yes.
we are Westerners.
I went to the UK for a tour in August, speaking in different cities. And when I arrived off the plane, we drove to wherever I was staying. When I got there, I looked and I noticed how clean the roads are, how new the cars are. People all dressed very nicely. Everyone ordered, everything in its place, a place for everything and everything in its place. Everyone on time. Everyone working hard and doing their job. All wonderful things, all, by the way, very Islamic things. You know, these aren't they're not the sole preserve of America. These are Islamic values, being on time and being honest and hard-working and being loyal to your friends and your family and protecting. These are all good things. But you know what I thought more than that? I looked at all these things and I also thought, even though these people have got everything they want, they're not happy. They don't look happy to me. They look miserable. I would never have imagined, when I first wrote a book explaining Islam to my friends who are not Muslim, that events would lead me to where I am today, where my whole life revolves around Islam, and where Muslims are asking me to tell them about Islam all the time. But then again, that's what Islam is. Islam is not just a religion, it is a complete way of life, and Islam for a Muslim is everything. From writing that first book, Gardens of Delight, A Simple Introduction to Islam, circumstances led me to get involved in writing more. So I was invited to give another talk, and then another talk, and then another one. And then a radio program, and then a TV program. And then I was asked to start writing for a newspaper in Egypt, and then another newspaper, and then for a magazine, and then for an Islamic website, which I still write for regularly. And then finally I established my own website, idristawfiq.com, in which I tried in a very simple way just to sum up the work I do and the things I've written for people who are not Muslim and for those who are. I've worked with young people in one way or another all of my life. Young people keep you young. And I enjoy being with young people. I like going out to eat with them, and with my students, I meet my students. Sometimes we walk and we talk and we laugh, and it's a good way of getting to know one another. Muslim young people have the same concerns as young people all over the world. They think about study and about jobs and about relationships. They're trying to establish who they are, working out their own identity. And it's a great privilege to be involved with young people because young people say things as they are. They don't have a lot of the hang-ups that older people have. They speak the truth. They make mistakes, but alhamdulillah, we've all made mistakes. And we learn from our mistakes. Some people say to me, what advice do you give to the youth? Well, I don't give anyone advice. I've made enough mistakes in my own life not to give advice. All we do, we talk about Islam. And I try to explain Islam in a very simple way. I'm not a Muslim scholar. I'm a very simple man. And I just talk about my own experience of Islam in the language that ordinary people talk. Another aspect of my work is working with people who are new to Islam, with new Muslims. Of course, Muslims believe that Islam has existed since the beginning of time, that it's the natural religion of mankind, and that all people in a natural state are really born Muslim. It's only the actions of other people make them Christian or Jew or whatever religion. So this is why we never say that people convert to Islam. I like to say that when people come to Islam later in life, they embrace Islam. One of the problems we have as Muslims, though, is we spend millions of pounds calling people to Islam. We spend millions of pounds on videos, on books, on cassettes, on talks, on all manner of things, calling people to declare Shahada. And the problem is, once we have called people, we leave them, and we don't help them in their faith. At that very start, when they're making their baby steps as Muslims, we as the Muslim community should be most careful to take care of them, but instead we often leave them on their own. And this is to our shame. At the end of time, we'll have to answer to this. In the modern world, the internet is one of the main ways that people communicate. And I spend a lot of time, really a lot of time, on the computer, emailing people, answering emails, writing. I write for a number of Islamic websites. In fact, I have my own website now. I realize that this is one of the best ways to communicate with people. So my own website, idristawfiq.com, very simple. It has three main sections. One is called Muslim Youth. One is called Heritage, and it talks about the great history and the treasures of Islam. And the other one is called Islam and the West. And in many ways, those three areas embrace the sort of work that I do. And through the website, people can see what I've been doing, where I'm going, what I've said, what I've written. And also, it's a wonderful way, it's a truly privileged way that I hear from other people. And it really is wonderful each day to receive emails from people all over the world that I've never met, saying words of encouragement and words of help. SubhanAllah. Gardens of Delight, A Simple Introduction to Islam, was the first book I wrote. And it was written for people in the West who know nothing about Islam. But to my great surprise, another audience grew up, an audience of young Muslims. And so these are the two groups I write for now. I write for people in the West who know nothing about Islam, but I also write for Muslims, reminding them how beautiful Islam is. This year I'm publishing a number of books called Ask About Islam. The first one is talking to young Muslims, others talking to British Muslims, talking to Muslim sisters, talking to new Muslims. One of the great things, really special things about my work now is that it affords me the chance to travel all over the world. And it really is wonderful. It's wonderful because I get to meet very, very good people. I get to experience many different cultures and many different flavors of Islam. We might call them different flavors. Islam is the same all over the world. There is only one Islam. But visiting different Muslim lands, different Arab lands, you see different aspects of Islam, where the people treasure Islam in a different way. Let me give you one example. Last winter, I was invited to visit Toronto in Canada by the Islamic Institute of Toronto. I was invited to speak at their annual winter dinner. It took place on the 25th of December when the rest of Canada was celebrating Christmas and eating turkey and mince pies. And the thing that really struck me as marvelous was this young, vibrant Muslim community gathered together. They had a marvelous dinner, 600-700 people there. I was the speaker at their dinner, but I learnt more than anything I said. I was touched by the way these Muslims joined together, celebrated their faith, celebrated socially, and taught not only me, but the rest of Canada that Islam can live very comfortably in the West. No problem. No clash of civilizations. Islam's at home in every civilization. Another very memorable visit was to the UK in February 2007. I was invited to go there by the Federation of Student Islamic Societies of the UK and Ireland, and spoke in many universities. And it really was an occasion when I had wished the television cameras had been with me. Because instead of the image of Islam that we see on the TV in the West, those cameras would have shown polite, well-behaved, well-mannered, faith-filled young men and women who were keen to learn more about Islam, but who were also very keen to play a full part in their society. And one thing that struck me very much was, even though they're having so much heaped upon them and being blamed as the scapegoat for so many things, these young Muslim men and women could laugh and joke about it, because they could say, Subhanallah, Allah is in charge. So it was a great opportunity again to learn from young people and to see how, despite all the pressure that they're under, Muslims in Britain can be such a good example, holding fast to the rope of Allah. Another invitation was to speak at Al-Akhawain University in Morocco, at Ifran. Now again, as I say, it's a wonderful opportunity, all of this travelling, to speak about Islam. because I had no idea that Morocco was such a beautiful country. I had no idea that it had mountains and forests and rivers and lakes. And I was invited by a group of young professionals, university students too, to speak about interfaith dialogue and leadership. And they had a very, very splendid conference at Al Akhawain University, sharing their ideas and showing their love for their country. And this, this really strikes me. Of all the countries I've been to, the Arab countries, the Arab people that I speak to, Muslims and Arabs, they love their country. I love Syria. I love Morocco. I love Egypt. This is what they tell me. And it really is heartwarming, especially when the television is telling them all the time that their countries are backward, that their countries are lacking in this, that their countries are falling behind the West in that. It is wonderful. And so in Morocco, for example, these young men and women who were very well educated, many of them doing master's degrees and doctoral degrees, many of them businessmen, businesswomen, were not only saying how much they loved their country, but also what they wanted to do for their country and how as Muslims they could help their country. And inshallah and alhamdulillah, I'm invited to play a very small part in encouraging Muslims. In fact, I'd say the thing I do most, the thing I have to offer Muslims most, is to encourage them that Islam is great and that Muslims should be proud of being Muslim and that Islam is no threat to any of their countries at all, but indeed, given the chance, would enrich them. One of the things I learned long ago was that if you're going to speak to people about matters of faith, you have to speak to them in a language they understand. Otherwise, it's so much hot air, and people will sit looking at you and they really don't know what you're talking about. I'll give you an example. Something really wonderful happened. I visited the International Islamic University of Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur. And much to my surprise, almost my horror, the students there asked me to give the khutbah in the university mosque on the Friday. And I found myself, we entered the mosque from the back, from the imam's offices, and I went up the steps of the pulpit, the minbar, from behind. So when I opened the door, my eyes were greeted by 5,000 people for Friday prayers. And really what I had to say was very simple, very simple. So much so, and I don't say it to blow my own trumpet. I say that when the sermon, the khutbah was finished, I found it very difficult to get out of the mosque, because many of the people crowded round me and said, no one's ever talked to us like that before. No one's ever spoke in a simple way like that before. And all I did, I didn't say anything special. I mean, they knew more about Islam than I do. They've been Muslims much longer than I have. All I told them was that in fact, I spoke about having idols in our hearts. We can talk about idols up here as something in the past in Mecca. But we have idols in here that we still haven't got rid of. So I just talked to the brothers and sisters at the Friday khutbah about how to take away the things in our hearts that keep us from Allah. And alhamdulillah, they were listening. They were listening. You know, I go to the mosque every Friday, and often, I blame no one, but often the people are told, you must do this and you must do that, and you must be careful to do this and you must be prompt to do that, when really what they want to hear how to get on with their wives. They want to hear how to deal with their children. They want to hear how, as good Muslims, they deal with employers who are unjust to them. And we should begin, it really is very important, in talking about Islam, we should begin where people are. And we should feed their hearts. We should touch their hearts. I know that Almighty Allah brought me to Islam by touching my heart. And we can go through the motions of things. We can declare all manner of beliefs, but unless it touches our hearts, a lot of it is so much hot air. So inshallah, as Muslims, by being good Muslims, we can tell the world about Islam without any speeches, without standing on boxes and shouting. We needn't mention Islam, but by living good lives, by being good men and women, by being faithful to prayer, by getting to know the life and example of our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, by learning from the heroes of our faith, by learning from the great history of Islam, and by being polite to one another, by greeting one another with Assalamu alaikum, and in all things saying Alhamdulillah, then the world will see what Islam is like. Damascus in Syria was chosen as the Arab capital of culture for 2008. And I've been very lucky to be invited to Syria a number of times to speak at conferences and to meet many interesting Muslim scholars. Damascus is famous for its scholarship. And I was very lucky to come for a book launch. My book, Talking to Young Muslims, we actually launched it in Damascus as part of the Arab capital of culture. I'll give you an example from Syria of how we must grasp every chance we can to speak about Islam. I was in Damascus in a restaurant with a friend of mine, and there were a group of Muslim ladies there for lunch. And there was no plan, none of it was planned, but I ended up giving these ladies a little talk about my journey to Islam without any plan. And we must always use every opportunity without standing on a box and shouting, of telling the world what Islam is like. And the prayer started. And when it started, I began to cry. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried like a baby. Like a baby. And when the prayer was finished, I went to Yusuf Islam and I said, Brother, I want to be Muslim. I want to be Muslim. And he said to me, repeat after me, Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And since then, my life just completely changed. I must also say that the image people have, and I can't fail to say this, the image that people have in the west of Syria is just groundless. People have this notion of Syria being one thing. The people are very kind. The people are religious. It's a lovely place. Perhaps because of my background as a religious and as a Roman Catholic priest, I've become heavily involved in interreligious dialogue, talking to people of other faiths. There's a great deal of misunderstanding about what interreligious dialogue really is. It is not a belief that all religions are the same, and it doesn't really matter what you believe. It's not that. If it was that, I would not be involved. Islam is perfect. Islam, as we've said many times, is the natural religion of mankind. The purpose of interreligious dialogue is simply that people of faith have far more in common with each other than the secular people who would banish religion and faith and spirituality from our societies. And in a world torn apart by religious strife, where people are starving and poor and hungry, religious people should spend more time talking to each other than arguing over trivial things.
Idris Tawfiq, an esteemed author, religious scholar and convert to Islam. Following his degree in sacred theology from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, he spent many years as head of religious studies in different schools throughout the UK.
I've always enjoyed speaking to people, speaking to crowds, and I've always been a confident person. But Islam has given me a real confidence in my personality. It's strengthened me as a person. Islam has made me strong and it's also taught me to be very gentle. Our beloved Prophet, salatu wassalam, told us that when we want to talk to people about Islam, we should use wise words and beautiful preaching. He also told us that all we need to call others to Islam is one ayat of Quran and a good heart. I'm really blessed in that my work of talking to people about Islam brings me into contact with princes and ambassadors. It brings me into contact with little boys on the street who have no shoes on their feet, with sisters and brothers, with young and old, because Islam is for all people. Because Islam is for all people. People ask me, what is the greatest problem faced by Muslims today? I'm a very simple man, and I think the answer is very simple. The answer is that as Muslims, we don't pray. We don't pray. We can spend 5 hours sitting in front of a television. We can spend hours chatting on the internet about people we'll never meet. We can spend hours on the phone talking about nothing. But when the adhan sounds, we're very slow to pray, instead of being prompt to run to pray. We talk about calling people to Islam, and we don't even get up in the morning to pray Salat al-Fajr. This is the problem. The world tells Muslims that Islam is very harsh. And unfortunately, many of us have fallen into the trap and we believe it. Islam is not harsh. So the greatest problem we face as Muslims is that we don't know the real Islam ourselves. We don't know the real Islam ourselves. It's not by standing on a box and giving a sermon and pointing fingers at people that you will call anyone to Islam. The world will sit up and listen to what we say if we were truly to live as good Muslim brothers and sisters. If we are prompt to prayer, if we recite the Holy Quran and learn the sayings and the traditions of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we would turn the world upside down with such a message, and without any words